Hello everyone, welcome back. We're going to be doing another Red Dawn video. I've been doing a video series where basically I'm looking at I'm analyzing the movie Red Dawn, which is an 80s movie where the Soviets and the Cubans have invaded the United States, occupying half of it, and the people caught behind enemy lines are forming up militias and they're fighting the communists. So I've done a couple of videos on this subject. It's very entertaining. If you guys haven't seen the previous videos, go check them out. But in this particular video, I'm going to be looking at how a militia would be fighting in an urban area. Okay, in the movie, the militia fighters are fighting primarily through forested areas, but the Soviets are occupying half the country. So it stands to reason that there's a lot of cities that are obviously caught behind enemy lines. And in this video, we're going to look at how would people be forming up militias and fighting the Soviets in those cities or in those urban areas. Okay, so I have a board here that I know that you guys probably can't see very well. At the end of the video, I'll kind of give you guys a close-up so you can look at the outline. Right now, I'm just going to be using it for my benefit. Just so I have something to follow rather than sit here with a pad, because there's a couple of things there's a bunch of things I want to talk about. The first thing that we have to consider is, how are these cities taken? Okay, are they taken like the way the Germans took Paris? During World War II, where Paris was basically surrendered, and the Germans took it intact. Okay, is it a situation like that? Or is it more of like a Stalingrad type of situations where there was basically the city was destroyed, as the Germans took that, basically we're trying to take that city. So what type of city are we looking at? Are we looking at one that's been taken intact, or are we looking at one that's taken, as in rubbles? Okay. And we're going to get into more detail about that later. So the first thing I want to consider is, the Soviet goals. Okay, why are they taking the city? Why would they want to take the city? Why wouldn't they just bypass it? Why would they want to be in the city? And the first reason that I can think of is that they want to make sure that the people that are in those cities, stay out of combat. Okay, because cities typically have lots and lots of people. And basically, if you look at some cities that have, populations in the millions, that's a lot of people that you can put into combat really quickly. Okay, so part of the reason why I think the Soviets would want to take control of the cities is because they want to keep those people out of combat. Okay, they want to isolate them and not give them an opportunity to basically fight against them. Okay, so that's the first reason that I can think of. The second reason I can think of is they want to take those people and put them into production. Okay, now the problem that they're going to run into is that at the time that this movie takes place in the basically mid 1980s, at that point, American cities are really not manufacturing centers. Okay, they're basically, they're banking centers. They're primarily pushing, money around. They're pushing paper around. They're pushing, bits and bytes on computers around. Certainly like in the mid 1980s. So they're not actually producing anything. So one of the problems that the Soviets are going to have is they're taking over cities that are not producing anything useful to them. Okay, they're not producing they're not producing guns, they're not producing food, they're not producing trucks or equipment that they can use in most cases. So that's part of the problem. And the thing is that there's a lot of people in those cities that have to be fed. Okay, now. The problem that's going to happen is that, when the Soviets take over half the country, right, the food supply is going to be interrupted. Okay, food production is going to fall. So that's going to create another problem in terms of feeding these people, because the farms are probably not producing that much food. Okay, possibly because they're in the war zone, and secondly, the ability to transport food from one part of the country to another part of the country will also be diminished. A lot of the trains and trucks that are used to move food around are might be compromised. They may have been blown up. Also, there might be a problem of fuel to move the food around. So that's one of the problems that the Soviets are going to have. They need to get these people. They need to put them into production. They need to make them productive. And what's going to happen is if they cannot make them productive, they're going to end up eliminating them one way or another. Okay, they're going to basically starve to death. Okay, so that's one of the problems that the Soviets have. They have to get these people productive, or they're not going to be able to keep them alive. Okay, that's just reality. Okay, and we saw this with Stalin. I mean, Stalin did not hesitate to eliminate people that he deemed unproductive. Okay, so we're basing this on real history here. And the third goal of the Soviets is that they need to destroy any and all resistance. Okay. And there's going to be basically two forms of resistance. It's going to be either isolated pocket. They're either going to try and destroy isolated pockets if they can find them, and if they can't isolate the pockets, if they can't get isolated pockets that they can focus on, they're going to start doing like citywide destruction. They'll just start using artillery and start dropping bombs. So it's not. The Soviets are not beyond destroying entire cities because it meets their goals. Their primary goal is to keep these people out of combat. And if they can put them into production, that's great. If they cannot put them into production, then they're going to fall back to eliminating them. And if they destroy the entire city again, that keeps these people out of combat, so they can't fight the Soviets. Okay, so that's the Soviet goal. The primary goal is to keep the people in the cities out of combat. Now we're going to look at the militia goals, right? You got the militias that are either forming within the cities or militia groups from outside the cities that are going into the cities, to combat the Soviets. And what I want to look at is what would be the goal of the militias. Okay, why would they be going into the cities? Why wouldn't they just be, just leave the Soviets there with the people and fight them outside the cities? Well, the first reason I can think of is they want to deny that manpower to the Soviets. Okay, so they don't want, because over time, basically, the Soviets may start recruiting some of those people into their army. And we saw that again with the French during World War II. The French were able to, the Germans were able to recruit a lot of the French to fight for them. Okay, so that would be one of the goals of the militia. They want to keep the people in the cities, from helping the Soviets. They don't want them joining the Soviets, and there's lots of ways that the Soviets can get these people to help them. Among them, feed them. Okay, down here in red, you see food equals money. Okay, so in a situation like this where the Soviets have occupied half the country, and there's food shortages, interruptions in food production, food is money. People will do things that they didn't think they would do before for food. Okay, so the militia wants to deny that manpower to the Soviets. Okay. Second goal would be to stop any production. If the Soviets are able to to get the people in those cities, to get them productive, to start producing things that help the Soviets, whether it's ammunition, making ammunition, or even just servicing their machinery, like their trucks and their tanks. We want to keep the people in the cities from helping the Soviets. Okay, so that's another concern of the militia. Okay, because again, there's a lot of manpower in the cities, and we don't want the Soviets utilizing that manpower. Okay, and the third goal of the militia would be to recruit new fighters. Okay, because again, you got a lot of people in the cities, and if you can recruit some of them to fight for you, that would be really helpful. Now, of course, here's the thing. I grew up in the city. Okay, so I grew up in New York City. So I'm very familiar with city people, and like I said, food equals money. Most city people will switch sides pretty quickly for food. Okay, I mean, that's just how it is. I mean, we see this, with welfare. I mean, basically, welfare is food. We see in many cases, Democrats basically give free food for votes. Okay, so you see how quickly people are willing to give up their rights. They're willing to give up their guns, for free food in cities. Okay, that's the situation in the cities. So we already have a basis for that. We know that a lot of the city people will switch sides, so we have to be cautious about trusting them and how far we're going to trust them. Okay, so those are the goals of the militia. So both the Soviets and the militia are really fighting for the same thing. The Soviets want to keep the people out of combat against them, and potentially use them in combat to help them. Whereas the militia wants to keep the people in the cities from helping the Soviets, and they don't want them to help the Soviets in any way. And incidentally, this was also a goal of the British during the American Revolution. Okay, the part of the British plan, it was never to bring over enough soldiers, to defeat the colonists. Part of the British plan was to tap into the 30% of the colonists that were loyalists, and get the colonists to help them, put down the independence movement, because probably less than 3% of the colonists were actually fighting against the British, and they only had the support of maybe about 30% of the people. Okay, so you had 40% of the people in the middle that really didn't care. So between the 40% that didn't care about the American Revolution and the 30% that were strong British supporters, the British had about 70% of the population to tap into for recruiting purposes. For basically, again, people will do stuff for money. So that was part of the British plan. So this is a very, this is an important consideration. You're going to have both sides here, trying to get the population either to help them or to not help the other side. Okay. So now let's look at a situation now where the cities are taken intact. Okay, they are not rubble. They're taken intact. How can we possibly operate inside these cities? Well, what typically happens with armies, okay, and this goes all the way back to Roman times, okay, when you keep the armies, let's say either in the forests or the fields or the desert, in camps, isolated, they tend to be much better disciplined, okay. Once armies get into cities, they usually spend a lot of time at the gambling tables and at the whorehouses, okay. So if you have a Soviet army in any city, what's going to happen is, once those soldiers get off duty, they're going to be hitting the nightclubs, okay, the whorehouses, the casinos. Even if these cities don't have them, they're gonna start appearing, okay, because that's what soldiers want, okay. When soldiers, when men get off of duty, what do they want? Okay, they're gonna look to have a good time. So once these guys get off duty, they're gonna be going to the nightclubs, and getting drunk, so that's gonna, over time, that's gonna become an area, a vulnerability. Okay, that's gonna become an area of vulnerability. So as far as actually attacking them and trying to take them out of combat, especially once they're drunk, out of the nightclubs, let's say on their way to an apartment with a lady, that's a good place to set up an ambush, and it's going to be really close quarters, basically outnumbering them. And what we want at this point, right, no bodies, okay, basically once they attack them, presumably the woman that led him there is part of the militia. Okay, so once that Soviet soldier is eliminated, the body needs to be basically destroyed so that they can't find it, because that is going to enable our militia to carry this operation on for some period of time, because the commanders are just going to assume that they've gone AWOL, so it'll take a while for them to catch on to what's going on, as long as the bodies don't start turning up in the streets. Okay, so Now, at some point it will switch over to, the next level where the Soviets catch on that, yeah, there's active militias in the area that are organized and fighting against them. At that point, we're going to start, they're going to start actually attacking them, in a militia format, setting up ambushes, L ambushes, that kind of stuff. So at that point, the big concern is escape. Okay, once you set up your ambush, how do you get out of there? The big problem with cities, is, as opposed to like forests, because in prior videos, our militia fighters have been fighting through forests, and the thing with forests is that you have, continuous tree coverage to get out of an area. The problem with cities is that cities are basically organized into city blocks, and the Soviets would be able to use the streets to get back up really quickly to that area and isolate our militia fighters, and then basically blow up the whole building. Okay, so and we saw this, let's say, in Iraq. Okay, that's basically what the U.S. Army did. Once they isolated the insurgents, they essentially just blew up the buildings. Okay, so that's what's going to happen. So what has to happen is that part of the plan has to be tunnels. Now, a lot of old cities, right? And I know that in the movie Red Dawn, this happened on the West Coast. I'm going to use New York City as the example because I grew up in New York City. So a place like New York City and other old cities like New York City that have subway systems, right? The subway systems, the sewer systems, the steam tunnels, because New York City has steam tunnels. These are all ways that to basically cross from one side of the street to the other. But this needs to be planned in advance. Okay, you can't just get yourself corner yourself in the building and then all of a sudden start looking for tunnels to get you out of it, because that's not how these buildings are set up. You have to plan this in advance. You have to basically do a little demolition in the basement to gain access to the tunnels, and you have to do this at several points in order to go from street to street to street. So it's an advanced planning operation. Okay? You have to plan your exit. You have to know exactly where you're going to attack them, and how you're going to get out, and how you're going to get out of the area. So that has to be planned. So in this phase of the militia fighting, right, we've gone from basically hitting the Soviets when they're drunk, okay, and basically isolating them in apartments and basically killing them at really close range. We've moved on to tunnel warfare, okay, because that's essentially what this is. This is tunnel warfare now, because that's going to be the primary. That's what we're going to use to move back and forth. And of course, once we make an attack, and the Soviets are going to investigate that area, they're going to find all those tunnels. So the next time we want to make planned attack, we have to set up a whole new, we have to have a completely different plan, right? We have to be in a different area, use a different set of tunnels to get out. But that's what we're going to do. We're going to make use of the tunnels at this point in the operation. So, as I said, places like New York City, I'm sure places like Los Angeles, Seattle, Chicago, a lot of these old cities, they're going to have subways, they're going to have sewers, they're going to have steam tunnels, and that's what we're going to tap into to be able to move our people around. Okay. At some point, this is going to transition from tunnel warfare into rubble warfare. Okay. And that's going to start resembling the forest combat that we were talking about in prior videos, because once you get rubble all over the streets, once you have buildings that are like half destroyed, now you have a situation where you can actually move your militia across the street, because now they have abandoned cars, they've got they've got pieces of building in the street. So now they have more things that they can hide behind and kind of move through to get through the city. The other thing is that once you got rubble in the streets, the Soviets are not going to be able to move their vehicles, their tanks, through the streets and be able to get from one side of the city to the other side of the city. Okay. The other thing that's going to happen is that you're going to probably have less population at this point, okay? Because, you know, if we're at the point of rubble warfare, the vast majority, or rather a great portion of the population of the city, you know, is probably dead, okay? Or they managed to get out of the city. But, you know, in a situation like this, there's really no place to escape to, because where are they going to go? You know, at this point, they're really not going to be welcomed anywhere, because there's a food shortage everywhere. So it's highly likely that the roads, the bridges, you know, leading out of these cities are going to be destroyed. Okay, so the people are pretty much trapped in the cities, and given the food shortages, you know, given that at the point that we are at rubble warfare, you know, the water system has been has broken down. The sewage system has broken down. So you can't get fresh water into the city. You can't get sewage out of the city. So now you're going to have the spread of disease. So you're going to have the population dying off at this point. So you know, what that's going to allow our militia fighters to do is to be able to move around the city, you know, and not be seen, because there just aren't as many people there. Okay, so that's just the reality, and you know, I mean, that's just how it is. And the basis for this is Stalingrad and Leningrad, you know, during World War II, and Berlin. You know, when the Russians started moving, you know, through Germany, you know, they created rubble warfare in Germany as well. So that's what rubble warfare is gonna look like. Okay. You know, so at the point that we're at rubble warfare, it's going to be very similar to, you know, fighting through forests. Okay. Now the last thing I want to mention is supplies. Okay. You know, our militia fighters that are in the you know, are in the cities. You know, the three things that they're going to need is food, guns, ammo. And when I say food, I mean food and water. You know, food, water, guns, ammo. You know, early on they might be able to get it from within the city. But you know, very quickly they're not going to be able to. So they're going to need to have a reliable supply line to bring you know, these supplies into the city from outside the city, in order to be able to you know, maintain their efforts. And the key component here is that food, you know, equals money. So you know, the food that they are bringing in, they'll be able to use that. You know, to buy information, you know, to buy prostitutes for the purpose of trying to lure the Soviets into traps. You know, so food is money in this case. So there are some ideas about you know, what urban combat would look like in a Red Dawn situation where the Soviets have occupied half the United States. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pause this and kind of zoom in so you guys can get a better look at this list, in case you want to, you know, read through it. Give me a second. So if you guys like this video, give it a thumbs up, share it. The thumbs up help. It basically ends up showing up as a suggested video, you know, and more people get to see it, and we get to bring more people to the channel and have more discussions. So that's why the thumbs up are kind of important. And if you're not a member of the channel, subscribe so you can see new videos that I make. I'll talk to you guys soon.